Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Fire's Fire. This is a special episode. We're really excited today. But first, we want to put a huge shout out to our good friend Joshua Rutherford. We're streaming from the Regenerative Cannabis YouTube channel now and going forward, and we're super happy about that. So thanks so much, Josh. And if you guys aren't giving it a follow, make sure you're following Dutch and the Regenerative Cannabis Conference and all the great work he does. But today, I am stoked, beyond excited. We've got a really cool guest on, somebody who I'm proud to say is becoming a good friend. As always, I'm joined by my co-hosts, the talented RJ Ellis and Dr. Brian Paul. And
I think RJ's just logged back on.
And today we're bringing on Vangyptian. So, if you're in Canada or, in the hash scene globally, you've probably heard of him. The guy's made a lot of waves, and we're incredibly excited and honored to just chop it up and get ready and strap in. Like, this isn't going to be a short episode. This guy is opinionated, he's knowledgeable, and we're about to go down the rabbit hole. So, Chevy, thanks so much for taking the time and joining us, man. We really appreciate having you here.
Oh, I appreciate you guys for taking the time and hosting me today. Looking forward to talking everything hash, maybe diet, everything in between.
Absolutely, brother.
I think Jameson's statement as like making waves in the Canadian hash scene. I think that's maybe an understatement. I think you've revived the true hash scene, not the new rosin and melt. I think you've revived, maybe single-handedly, or at least kind of, taking it forward, the true old school hash scene in Canada. And, I said this the other day when we spoke. I wouldn't ever touch traditional hash in the past 5 years. Since I've seen what you're doing, and since, even more so since we spoke, I got to get my hands on it.
Absolutely. When it comes into hash, the history of it entering Canada and the US has not been the most consistent in quality. And I would say by the late 90s, the quality started to go way low down. Even or the grades, people are starting to get batches that are hit or miss. And then nowadays, whenever you talk about hashish, people can think about Moroccan, import, Afghani, and definitely hash is much, much more than just these two kinds. And yeah, people associate hash of just being cheap. And luckily we're in Canada. We got all sort of genetics and grow styles and high quality resin. And they could still be processed the same way as traditional hash is processed. Just gotta chop it up and present it to the consumer in the way they could resonate with, whether it's Absolutely. Nice, shiny, and melty hash or something as rough and crude as the hash blends.
Pun intended, resonate.
Chevy, before we dive in, because there's so much to unpack as far as the product offerings and the materials you're working with and all that things. We want to go back. We want to get a background on you. For the people who are listening, where are you from? What's your background? Let's start there.
All right. I'm from Egypt, and I came to Canada early 2014 on the hopes of studying and whatnot. I have been always intrigued about my culture back home, but as you know, it's a dangerous spot to explore it and try to learn about it. It's mostly about consumption and a down low culture. It wasn't the case.
Let's talk about that a bit, Chevy. I want to go into, I know you weren't really a user when you were living in Egypt, but set the stage for the people listening of what cannabis is like in Egypt, what it's thought of. Is it,
what are the laws like?
Yeah.
Okay, so we go back to where it all went wrong. The late 1800s, when Napoleon has occupied Egypt, one of their first orders were to control tea, tobacco, and cannabis. Definitely cannabis, which is basically known as hash over there. Smoking flower is not known in producing countries or Middle East in general. It's definitely looked at as just green. How can you get a decent high or flavor out of that? So since that happened, cannabis got prohibited all over Egypt, and then branching out to the rest of the Middle East. It has been part of our culture since somewhere between 5 to 6,000 years ago, going back to ancient Egypt, as we have used cannabis in a multitude of ways, from fiber, ropes that we used to drag the 20-ton stones that used to drag the stones for the pyramids. And
I never even thought about that, but of course they would be a hemp or cannabis. What other material would you have at that time that's stronger?
we're known for cotton, but that's mostly for clothes, and you could make ropes from that, but they're not as durable as hemp ropes. So that was one of the uses for it. And then when it comes into the consumption, they have used it as they used hash the same way we use it right now. They used to smoke it in pipes. And another way in consumption was what we call topical use. And they used to infuse some sort of wine with fragrant resin. Hash was called fragrant resin in ancient Egypt. And the mix.
Was that for everybody, Chevy, or was that royalty only, or was that lower class only? Like, do you have any understanding of that?
That was used on the whole country, from all grades of society, from the lowest to the highest.
And was there like a doctor or like a local shaman or something, or was it just everybody goes and gets it and does it themselves?
So the details are vivid. I haven't done enough research to know about how or who prescribed it, but it was known as a remedy mainly for PMS, where they used to so they get the mix of alcohol, hash, and some cloth, and they soak that overnight, and then they use the cloth to wrap around the waist of menstruating females. And from there, that was one of the documented uses for pain relief for cannabis in ancient Egypt.
So did that clearly didn't continue? That what happened from there to current day, and where did the disconnect take place?
So it has been still carried out until the occupation of Egypt. We have been occupied by a few nations, but we're liberated now. Not the laws, they definitely left, and they kept their changes that has happened. So it happened since ancient Egypt, say until before the prohibition. Cannabis or hash in general was a essential part to the Egyptian lifestyle. We are a farming nation. We have the Nile River, so you get a lot of farmers plowing the fields in the scorching sun, many hours until the sun goes down. The farmers go to their house, they eat, and after that, they all collect together in a big circle in some sort of hay house where they could, it could be always be built in less than an hour or something. And yeah, it's usually built on spot, a circle of probably 10, 20, 30, how big is that village is. And they share some sort of hookah, but it's a stubby shaped hookah compared to the ones we know nowadays, with the bamboo stick shooting out from the body. And everyone takes turn on hash with charcoals on top. Basically, same way they would do it in Afghanistan. Just slightly different designs. We call it goza, and it was called that name because originally it was made from coconut shell and a bamboo stick, and that was all of it, and then just modernized a bit to what we see nowadays.
Sounds like the old school chalice.
Yeah, close to a chalice. So that has been the use for the longest time, from ancient Egypt until prohibition, and it was still used. And then since we started to form cities, we had coffee shops, stoner shops, where people could go and smoke and buy hash from whoever is running the shop, and it was regulated and acceptable until the prohibition has happened, and then it was wildly frowned upon as the prohibition. But the issue about hash, I would say, for the last 100 is too long. At least for the last 50 years, where hash is frowned upon, because the same thing that's happening with Canada and the US with the imports is happening in Egypt, but on a worse scale. So the hash that you get around here, the so-called import, is a third grade, if not less, and sold with plant material, doesn't smell the best, get you high, but it's not a true representation of what hash should be. On the other hand, in Middle East, mainly in Egypt, since it's already prohibited and it was treated like hard drugs, and definitely mix it with hard drugs. So the current scene of hash is a sad one. Education is pretty low, but we live in an age where internet is accessible, so the newer generation definitely are educating themselves way better than, let's say, the generation of 20 years ago.
When you say
that,
mixed with hard drugs, are you saying like heroin or like
Like
are they?
opium.
Oh, yeah, like
so
heroin, opium. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals and opium, Ultron,
Oh wow.
all kind of painkillers. So when you smoke hash, you're not getting hash high. You're getting a freaky high that make you look or feel like a zombie, slurred speech. You're like can't maintain your balance, and everything that would not look like something you want to use or you want your kids to grow up to see or do. And that's where the whole war against drug in Middle East is that most of their drugs are laced. Education is minimal to none because the prohibition that added part to the culture as if we never smoked or used the plant for thousands and thousands of years.
So what was that like growing up for you? Were you painfully aware of that? Or was that something that like was cannabis attractive to you from a young age, or was it something you only became aware and interested in later in life?
So I would say my interest peaked when I was around 12 years old, which don't really know much. But in Egypt, we have our own vibe of weddings when it's done in um, smaller villages or even in the cities. I don't think it even matter. Basically, when there's a wedding, it's a turn up. Everyone is happy and everyone is on their own vibe. And by that I mean all kind of drugs are being used in these certain occasions, mainly alcohol, beer, um, and then some pharmaceuticals, and mainly hash. Pharmaceuticals are new just because you get it in the hash, which is not really hash, and then you get that feel, and then you start to chase that sort of high. And that's where it has messed up the hash image for people, new users, and people that have seen the adverse effects of so-called hash. So in these kind of weddings or celebrations, you would always have each table with at least a few grams of hash. You would see people rolling, you would see people getting the piece of hash and burning it, and the aromas are getting in the air.
That's my kind
Don't
of
matter
wedding.
what you're. Sorry?
That's my kind of wedding. That's a dream wedding to have a dab station, a hash bar.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that, and definitely the law enforcements do not really bother with weddings or people having fun, um, unless there is known like something bad is going on there, and then they would just send some troops to check it out, what's happening. So my first interaction was with some friends and family members. Uh, you would see kids even younger than me in the wedding and just like exploring life, learning what everything is about. Usually you think it's more of an adult thing, but no, all cuts of life will share and will get a part of the experience. Not necessarily smoking, but you will be immersed into the vibe that everyone is into. And the first thing I've seen was a block of hash that was getting burnt, smoky. The aromas were very pleasant. Reminds me of my mom's cooking and certain spices. But something is really intriguing about the nose, more than just that smells like spices or food, that smells above.
Yeah.
And they mix it with tobacco and big, big joints. And it was lit, smoke is all over, and I'm smelling that. And definitely it's I would say like the second stage of getting high, or just the contact high. So
Yeah.
there's the burning part, and then there's when they light the joint.
Absolutely.
Speaking of that, I'll definitely light one. I usually there hash and tobacco are a social mixture. The way I could see it, nicotine doesn't. The nicotine lifespan and or bioavailability in your blood is not as long as cannabis, and the way it works, I feel that nicotine binds to THC, and as the nicotine period is over, you get you're done basically with the whole high. So it's a high that is controllable. I might be super stoned while I'm talking, but in 30 minutes or an hour maximum, somewhat sober again, and I could go into conversations, drive, or whatever. So yeah,
It's a
that was the
quick
first
mix.
interaction at 12-year-old. Wedding, hash, and then. And as I went through life, I started to hang out with more relatives to understand what it is about. I have never smoked any when I was in Egypt, and was mostly worried because a family that I was raised in is strict religious family. They're always looking for my well-being. Being the only son, a lot of responsibilities in that culture falls on me. So I kept my curiosity on the side and just accumulated whatever knowledge and culture that I could catch on those few hours that I was away from my parents until I came to Canada, and then my whole exploration journey started.
So let's get into that. Let's, what, first of all, coming to Canada from Egypt as,
Oh, sorry, I was in Saudi before that. I had
okay.
to, yeah, I had to travel a lot in my life,
Mhm.
judging my father's work, and that was even a better a better fate for my hash journey because I get
Talk
to
about
see the
that.
culture in
Talk about what was
different.
different.
Yeah.
So what was different, Chevy? From going from Egypt to Saudi,
Okay.
what
So in Saudi, it was. I was not. I would say it was not as open as it is in Egypt because their prosecution to cannabis is severe, up to a death sentence. Not up to a death sentence. That death sentence is pretty common if you have enough on you, and they would list you as a drug trafficker and off with your head. It started to change recently there, but I don't care much about what's happening there because um, just the laws and the use of cannabis over there, the it's not worth the consequences ever. It's good to learn. Didn't want to be involved. I was even more scared than I was in Egypt just because it's not my country, different people, different settings. But it was still the same. People gather in circles after a long day. It's never a wake and bake thing. It's always a nighttime thing, and with only the close ones, and everyone is just, you can feel it, the vibes in the air. It's always something in the air that the whole people in the same room are on the same vibe, and it's magical
I was
like
gonna say it's
that.
got to be some sort of a vibe. I can't imagine sitting potentially with three generations,
Yeah,
in a room and
yeah,
like smoking on a hash pipe. Like
yeah.
the fact
Sounds
that I
amazing.
the fact that I got to smoke a joint like once or twice with my dad, it was like I felt so fucking cool, and
Same.
like I just haven't smoked with him again. It's just like different, right? But
Yes.
like the fact that that could be part of the culture, and I'm bothered also by this by fucking North American culture because it's so normal to sit down and they got fucking commercials where you
Yeah,
bring whiskey over to your dad's house and you
yeah,
pour a drink and it's like,
yeah.
yo, let's have a drink and we're bonding. But the idea of smoking hash or hitting a dab or like even rolling a joint, or I mean in your case, Chevy, like the hash joints, you know, the tubes, to sit and
Yeah.
smoke with your parent and potentially grandparent. I can't. That's like really another level of experience. That's, you know, something I think we're missing. And when we say we're missing family here in North America, that's where it's like we hide everything from the other generations,
Yeah,
and
it's the
they're
generational experiences. We don't have the same generational experiences just in our culture, right? Like it's so weird.
so
That
it's so
sounds it
cool.
sounds
Like, yeah,
awesome.
to think about it, like, yo, you could be like fucking smoking
Yeah.
amazing melt with your grandfather.
Nice.
Yeah, that'd be
I
sick.
would definitely love for that
Yo,
time to come.
grandma, here's an AK. Like,
um, but at the end of the day, it was not something in an Egyptian household. It was more of the bro man culture more than anything else. Female do smoke, but you wouldn't find them openly talk about it. And
Sure.
then if there's any smoking happening, it's only happening between men and only a group that you trust because the vibe is sacred and you can feel everything that's happening as if we're all in the same wavelength. So yeah, as much as it was part of our culture, it was not part of the household, but it was our
Was the
very
hash
time.
better or worse in Egypt, in Saudi than Egypt?
It's all import. They're not a producing country, so things come in, and the hash is good or bad, depend on which family or group you hang out with. Some of them just want to get high for the sake of getting high, as some have trouble in life, some wants that relieving feeling of cannabis, and some consider it just like a tea or a coffee hangout, but with cannabis.
Like us.
So, yeah,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. Okay, so what year did you say you emigrated to Canada?
2014,
2014. So how old were you?
26.
26. All right. So coming into the country as a 26-year-old with very little
When I came there, I was 18.
18, sorry.
Yes.
That's what I thought. Coming into the country as an 18-year-old, you know,
Yeah.
without much experience of Western culture,
Yeah.
what were some of the first things that stuck out to you as shocking about Canada?
Drugs are everywhere. I was in Vancouver. That was the first thing I see. Everyone is doing drugs, and I
Now, when
can't.
you say drugs, are you saying like people like fucking shooting up on the side of the street, or everybody
Everything,
smoking weed?
Yeah,
everything.
yeah.
You walk everywhere. You're smelling funky smells. That's weed. That's whatever everyone's smoking on. But there is a lot of aromas in the air. And then whatever I was seeing, whether it's on Hastings or between friends or whatever, it was just very open thing. Alcohol aside, but it was everyone had their own thing and they're doing it. And I'm just looking like, is that okay? You guys are not worried? I was like, no, nothing happens. No one bothers you as long as you're not, as long as you don't hurt anyone or have bad drugs on you. People do not. No one seems to bother. So I did like the concept over there of acceptance, and I was completely clean when I came to Canada, and I didn't have anything in mind other than, I guess that's like Egypt, where I could learn some more. But since I was alone, and that would be my first trip to Canada without any family or relatives around, I had the freedom to experiment and just try to man up and do my own thing without having to worry about someone on top of me telling me what to do. So, first thing it started was exactly this. It was a hash spliff, the first thing I ever smoked. And why? Because, I mean, I smelled weed on the streets and I didn't like it. We have a dish called molokhia, which is some green herb. You can have it fresh or dried, and you make some food with it. It's a pretty slimy green plant, and the smell was exactly, exactly as that plant that I know in food. I was like, oh, people want to smoke something like that. It smells like hay and stuff that we use in cooking.
Mm-hmm.
So I was not encouraged to start with flour. So I went with hash and tobacco, what my relatives and friends used to do back home. And I tried that, and the high was, it was trippy at the beginning. My experience with cannabis, so is at least few of the close people that I know here was the same. They said the first time didn't feel like psychoactive; it was more like psychedelic. You're hearing, yeah, you're hearing pictures and seeing colors and for whatever people say. But it was a trippy feeling that this is not the way I perceive things, and it's not necessarily bad.
Mhm.
It's a feeling that I want to explore further and try. And since it was a short high, that was good too. So I was not completely immersed into the what people would call a bad trip or just greened out, or whatever terminology they use.
Did you do this alone or were you with people?
I was with a friend.
Okay, you were with a friend.
Yeah, so I moved into a family
Now wait,
residence.
a friend that's a virgin smoker or an experienced smoker?
He was a Saudi. Um, he was a Saudi, and he was how can I say a seasoned smoker. And he's been to Egypt. He's been
Okay, good. Because I was gonna say, otherwise you two are like fucking tripping balls, thinking you're gonna fall off the edge of the earth, and like, you thinking about checking into the hospital.
yeah, he was nice enough to give me the heads up. Don't smoke on an empty stomach. Don't wake and bake. Always do it at the end of the day, at night, where everything is calm and chill. And that was my first use with it. Again, the same way I've seen it being done back home. It's a nighttime smoke where
Okay.
everyone is asleep or not around, and you just do you.
Okay, Chevy. So you had that experience, and was it immediate intrigue? I immediately have to know more, or was there some trepidation around? That was pretty intense. What were your thoughts about it after that first experience with it?
So something clicked in my brain and told me that is a good feeling and I should chase that further. But originally, I was an athlete. I came here as a bodybuilder on 18, but then I slowly left that behind as my interest peaked into cannabis. Not necessarily that it let me abandon my passion, but I found a better passion where I could visit sports or bodybuilding if I wish to. But something about cannabis requires extensive research where I have all my senses in there and trying to have my own impression on it or understanding. So yeah, that would be my first feel about it. But I did not just stop at cannabis. I mean, stop at hash. I tried flower, and it was a weird, trippy high, brain scatter, and I wasn't really cautious about what I'm smoking. If it's back then indica sativa hybrid thing,
I was
or
about to
even
ask, do you
strain
think that any
specific.
of that was strain specific? Your choice?
I believe because there are mainly hybrids in sativas, I do not like those when they're labeled like that. So number one, placebo effect, and number two, it could be actually the terpene composition um, that does does that sort of high that I do not enjoy. The racy, anxiety, on edge. I do not fancy that at all.
Jameson's chasing that.
Yeah, I believe there is few people out there who love their racy, strong high.
I
I
have,
like,
I have a theory on that, and it just
yeah,
has to do with because 2 years ago I wanted nothing to do with those things, and it gets to a point of comfortability that you seek to be uncomfortable, and
yeah,
if you can live in the uncomfort
yeah.
and get used to the uncomfort and get comfortable in the uncomfortable, then you look to be really uncomfortable, and so I remember when Kevin Joji was like, here's my Roberts Creek Congo. It's like this thing will peel your face off and make you run beside a car. And yeah, you're right. You're right. Hash brown. It is narrowly for idols.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I look for them now. But I think. Um, so did you? When did you buy your first set of screens, or was it a set of bags or a set of screens that you first bought?
So I started with
Or did
ice
someone
water.
show you?
I started with ice water, and the person who showed me was a uh, a figure in the Canadian market in BC and Van. Not sure if I want his name to be mentioned, but that guy was my introduction to hash when I after I've done all my trials with different drugs, alcohol, and whatnot, and I just found myself going back to hash. So I've gone from something as mellow as cannabis to other extremes, and it was all experimental. No drugs ever stuck to me. There was no physical dependency, and I would say that's mostly because your lifestyle growing up, if you've been into any sport or just used to your natural chemicals in your body, and number two is the way you eat. So yeah, even though I was not training, but I was very cautious about my food, and cannabis seems to break that sort of control, the munchies. But slowly, I had to understand that again, you're feeling that certain way because cannabis does what it does, but also it tells you more about yourself if you have any deficiencies. Like, for example, before we branch out that heavy, but I would like to mention an example. For example, chips. When you have that urge to eat chips, whether you're stoned or not, that is a protein deficiency, and it means that you do not consume enough protein, or at least a high quality proteins, and that's why you get those certain urges. Um,
That's very interesting. And you've you've we've had some really interesting conversations around diet and ethnic background and nutrient requirements and how what you eat will affect the way that these these different hashes affect you.
Correct.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that right now, Chevy?
Sure, absolutely. So, um, being in Canada, everything is pasteurized. Everything is loaded with sugar and salt, not sodium, because sodium is not salt. People say, "Oh, it's the same," and it's that. Definitely, it's not. Salt is tiny rocks that accumulate in your kidney over time, and sodium is naturally occurring in foods, whether it's meat or plant or whatever you name it. But I do not believe in plant sources as the sole source of nourishment. If anything, they're a source of energy for carbs, and that's about it. Um, so going with the Canadian diet and the food that was surrounded around me, because again, I'm in a different country. I was completely experiencing everything from drugs to diet to lifestyle, and I was heavy on carbs and sweets just because it's wildly acceptable around here. You
Tastes
smoke,
good.
yeah, you smoke, you get munchies, you have all these sugar loaded products, and you're just consuming. Sugar reacts the same way, if not worse, than alcohol in your brain, at least the brain chemistry, and it's a killer combo. You get high, you get sugar high, you relax, you smoke some more, and it's a vicious cycle. And that's just because you're following your impulses without understanding why am I feeling that way and why am I consuming that thing in general. So yeah, my high was not the best. I had always that anxiety part on my smoke, unless it was with nicotine and mostly like heavy indicas or pushes. Those were the ones that's keeping me at bay until I decided to just drop it, try to find as much raw food as possible in terms of animal based raw and as high fat as I can consume. And I have noticed my munchies and pulses are not as strong, and I could hit a different joint back to back, same strain or different strain, without getting the urge to eat or get any of those negative feelings that are usually associated with high doses of cannabis. But I also grow to understand that it has a lot to do with your source as well. I've been getting things from random places, non-certified um, people, and I just understood from there. I gotta be more cautious with what I smoke, the same way I'm cautious with what I eat, and it did help somewhat. Um, there is a difference, but I don't think it's that major of a difference unless the product is defective with mold or pesticides and whatnot. And that was another thing, which I would assume some of the stuff that I've been smoking before were laced with compounds that do not belong to cannabis, and that's why I was feeling what I'm feeling. And I had to go back again through it after knowing what's right and what's wrong, just for the sake of testing again. And mold was one of the most issues that I've been encountering. And I smoked some knowing that it had mold, and the feeling was tightness in chest, difficulties in breathing, or it feels like my nose are clogged up, because I already suffer from a pre-existing sinus issues that has developed in Saudi. It's a dusty country. There's a lot of sandstorms, and yeah, if you are not cautious enough, you will develop some sort of respiratory illness over time. Which, bringing me to why I'm going heavy with hash and cannabis in general, or the whole ice water thing, or even SIFT, is that ice water will activate the terps if you're washing dry, and if you're washing live, the terps are going to be in the air, and those certain terps, not even certain, most terps has been very pleasant to me. Say I'm smoking that spliff, probably by the time I'm done, my nose are going to clog up a bit. If I'm washing after that, definitely I'm having the best breathing ever for that day, and I'm going to sleep with no clogged nostrils or anything. So it has been pretty helpful.
I think this is super interesting because, you know, we've become good friends with Mission Hill Melts, and shout out Adam and Hannah. And, you know, Adam uses a respirator when he washes. And I know a lot of guys that use respirators when they wash. And
Harry.
I actually, you know, I don't.
Yeah.
I probably should, but it's the opposite for you, where you actually find relief at the wash bin. And
So
I think,
far, yes. I'm not saying I'm invincible,
no,
but I believe our ancestors' exposure to cannabis has been far more than other nations, making my tolerance for terps far more than newer age countries that are being introduced to cannabis. And I would like to equate that, for example, with pork. Pork has been absent from our diet for hundreds or thousands of years. So many generations are not consuming that. And something about the pork composition requires a certain gut bacteria that can help you digest that with no issue, cooked or raw. Raw pork is a thing, but we'll get to that later. It has not been pleasant at all. Runny stomach. My body didn't seem to want to accept it. And I thought maybe it's just because the beginning. And I kept trying eating it every other time, and never worked for me. Small amount, big amount, didn't matter. And I definitely did not like the taste of pork itself. Again, there's many grades. There's wild, and there's one that's raised in a farm. Just had an off-putting flavor to me. The same way goat has a flavor, but pork had that flavor that I never liked. And yeah, from there, I would like to equate that to my terpenes and cannabis tolerance. For example, SIFT. SIFT would be far worse for some people that I worked with compared to ice water, just because it's not terps only, it's the whole resin heads floating in the room. You see them getting hives, itching, barely breathe. They need to hit the puffer. Some need to consume some sort of antihistamine pills that help with the decongestion or reaction. I think it's more of a allergic reaction.
Do you equate that to like a terpene or like from the plant material itself? Because we've had this discussion several times before, and it's
Yeah.
all speculation. But like, what are your thoughts on that?
So I don't think I've actually took the time to write down the data on different terps and different people that have watched it. For me, it has been all the same. For other people, some were used to Kush terps, some are severely allergic to Kush terps, some are okay with fruity ones, some are not. And some even equate it to not even the terps, but the crop is defective, whether it had mold or some sort of spray. And the lists are endless of possibilities, and it's hard to tell exactly which or what until it's tested on multiple stages to tell which is which. But overall, I noticed that all the hash makers It's a matter of exposure. So by exposure is not just washing or just smoking. It's your chances of developing allergic symptoms is due to more exposure. So if you grow, that's one. And if you trim, that's two. And if you're washing, that's another. And if you're pressing rosin and whipping rosin, that's another. And if you're smoking, that's another. So the more interactions you get with the plant for newer age hash makers, they definitely do not get the nicest. They don't feel as good as I feel usually when washing. Washing as much as meditation it is, I believe that's my prescription on the days that I want to breathe well,
I love
especially
that.
days that I dab a lot. Dabbing, definitely after 2 to 3 dabs, I don't think that I want to hit more, just because the same feel you get when you get cold. My nose is congested and I could not catch the proper terpene profile as I would as the first dab or the first 2 dabs of the day.
Yeah.
But that's for rosin, because for hash, when I'm dabbing hash, my congestion is not as severe as rosin, and I want to blame it on the rosin concentration in terms of how much terps are in there and that you're inhaling at every time you smoke, and what temperatures are you hitting it at, because you might not be getting those exact terpenes. They'll turn into benzene and become toxicants, and from there you get all these unnecessary feelings with cannabis.
So when was your first dab, Debbie? Were you early adopter and hitting red hot titanium nails on swings, or were you?
Yeah,
Or,
yeah. That would be the start. And
talk to us a little bit about that. What was that like?
That was the best response I think I've heard from anybody that we've asked before. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. Oh yeah, I fucked up like
yeah,
that bad.
it's all parts of development, and the only way you could tell quality or know what people should be smoking, or at least for you to be smoking, is to try and start where everyone is starting. And the reason I started it, not out of curiosity and just because I want to try it, but it was the environment I'm surrounded by. All the smoking lounges that was all over Vancouver, like Amsterdam, cannabis culture headquarters, and Eden, or cannabis culture on near English Bay. So that one in particular was the start of smoking. I mean dabbing, and just because they had this $5 dabs, all these crazy strain names for a person who just got recently into hash and flower, and all these things I could be trying, crazy. So I go for it. I buy different stuff and I dab it. It was chill at the beginning. I was smoking little. After a while, I started to catch mad anxiety that I'm not feeling okay being around people smoking shatter, $5 shatter from them. It's not like a $5 gram. They had those tiny dabs. I think it was like about a dab or two for $5. I think for most people it would be one dab, but I used to divide that into 2 to 3 dabs, and it was pretty nice. The different impressions of different strains, and that got me more into the whole concentration part, because flower is abundant around here. Everyone is smoking flower, and I would be very lucky to find someone that smoke hash so we can vibe on the same level. And people were definitely opposed to tobacco in Canada a lot, and that's completely fine. Um, this is poison right here, because that's not a good quality tobacco that you need to smoke. That's factory gas station type cigarette, but
Yeah, wild grown tobacco is completely different. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I recently quit all nicotine and tobacco, but I smoked cigarettes for 15 years, and I know that wasn't real tobacco. That was sprayed tobacco. So
as the same guy that got me into cannabis, he always describes it as radioactive
yeah,
fertilizer smoke. You're smoking radioactive tobacco, which was not that definitely why people are getting cancer. Smoking aside, and it's definitely those that the radiation in there was the cause of that. But so you have had issues with tobacco for 15 years, or an issue you had
I had a habit. I'd have it.
Habit.
I love it.
I never developed a habit. A pack would last me about 10 days to 2 weeks, just because I need to smoke 2, maybe 3 at the most. 3 at the most if I'm going hard that day of those spliffs. For me, it's not the most perfect way.
So you never actually smoked cigarettes. You were just using them
Yeah,
as fill.
I never carried a pack for the sake of smoking it. It was only as a carrier, because it did not. I never liked the taste of green and flower. People argue it's how grown and whatnot. Again, when a plant matter burn, they all have the same stench and feel to it, which I never liked. Don't like it sticking to my fingers, into my breath, and the aftertaste, and the cotton mouth feel, and all these things were not what's up for me. So I never went down with smoking flower on its own, but the hash blunts were what changed that, and we'll get to that later on when we talk about the blunts and how does it make it any difference than using regular rolling paper.
I want to talk a little bit about your progression into the space. Like, we talked a little bit about your first time dabbing. We talked that, your first experiences with a bag set and ice water. How did that begin? And what were some of, your first big failures that taught you a lot of lessons along the way?
Sorry, can you please repeat that question again?
So I just, when you take us through starting out as a hash maker, were you studying under somebody, or were you failing forward? And if you were failing forward, take us through some of those big, failure moments that I think we've all had as hash makers, the big oopsies.
All right, so same person that got me intrigued about hash was also posting actively about all cannabis processing, solventless at least. And he was posting a lot about Frenchie. And the first thing that got me into the hash thing is that temple ball effect, as Frenchie described it. If it's high quality, it turns into a pancake. That's how you tell it's a high quality resin. So I was really intrigued by that effect, and I started making my own. So I used to get my full melt or high quality hash from Eden Cannabis Culture on English Bay, but it was never consistent, and that was a big problem for me, because that was the high I'm happy with, no bad feelings, and this is exactly how I want to get high on cannabis. But the high was not consistent because the product was not consistent and mostly sold out, consistency aside. So I started just connecting the dots, watching Frenchie, and go from there. And my issues with hash in the first stages was nucleation, when the hash is not properly dried, or after it's dried and it's not stored properly, you come back to the granulated resin and it's all just waxing up, nucleating, however you want to call it. But it was not that gooey, sticky consistency that it was a couple of days ago for whatever reason. I started to reach out directly to Frenchie because he had his email on the Frenchie website, where he has all the articles and the magazine, the magazine articles, online articles. I tried to find my answer. I could not find it, so I hit him up, and he suspected that I was not drying for long enough. Definitely, that was one factor. And then secondly, I just grew to understand that not all strains will be stable for the longest time, and they need a different treatment compared to different hashes. Like, for example, this is Rockstar, that was all granulated and loose, and it's still sticky hash. That is not crumble. That is not a crumble consistency, is just holding itself together. That's been left out for 4 months, just sitting out with no lid, no nothing on the table. I take a piece from it, I dab it when I want, and I put it in a spliff when I want. And that was another way of learning about hash, is abuse your hash. At least just dedicate a portion, treat it like shit, or treat it like a consumer that it's still new to the product and wouldn't know what to do best with it. And yeah, I found out it's mostly strain dependent, because after a while I perfected my drying tech, and I was still getting some nucleation. It made me doubt my process a lot, but I just had to learn that certain terpenes do not like to stay at room temp and once it escapes, it works like some sort of exhaust that's shooting all the terps out, and then you end up with this dry, almost terpless, crumbly mess. Some people like it because it's easier to roll like that. For me, I felt I was getting like skim milk experience, not whole milk, just because the terps I would describe as the railroad for the hive.
What a great comparison.
Incredible.
Yeah, it was
Like-
missing. It was not complete because you smoke it. And I was like, that is not fully how I remember it. Because that's the first thing. Skim milk was not a common thing back
Fuck
home.
skim milk. Fuck skim milk.
Oh, actually, fuck pasteurization, and then fuck skim milk, because it's dead food. The way we're used to milk, it's always fresh or chilled, but it's never pasteurized. And if people want to boil it at home, they can boil it. But I have always found joy in raw milk compared to pasteurized. Like, I came here, milk was one of my favorite things, especially in bodybuilding. And I like to chug down a whole liter whenever I'm smoking or if I'm not smoking, but it was just a pleasant thing. And I do here. It tastes somewhat like what I remember back home, but not quite. Something is off. But the issue is not in the taste. It was more the digestion. I'm getting gassy and I'm not feeling so well.
The saliva build up.
And I just thought maybe I lost that bacteria that I carried back home. No, that can't be the reason. There should be something else. And apparently, as I ventured more into diet, it was the matter of dead and live foods. Not to associate that with cannabis, but for dead foods or anything that has been cooked. And the reason it's dead, because everything we eat has bacteria in it. Bacteria is not bad or good. There is basically, so your immune system, number one, and number two is those certain bacteria that do not harm the body, but it's existing in milk, are responsible for digesting the lactose that most people are having issues with. And when you cook it, you kill those bacteria, and you're just stuck with lactose that cannot be broken down. And then you have all these lactose intolerant people in the modern world, and it's very odd. Number one, we're not consuming the same milk from the cows that was brought into nature. We have the milking cows. That's number one. And again, that's an unnatural animal. Same thing with plants. 95% of all the vegetables you see on the market do not exist in nature and never existed 400 years ago or so. It's all selective human breeding, and that's that. And I wonder if that's the same for cannabis. Like the peaks we're reaching with cultivation and getting the highest THC, the craziest terpenes. Everyone is posting about how much terps and how much of everything in there. We do not need that much, and if we can consume it, better be in hash. And to consume that on a daily basis is a lifestyle, whether it's live or dead. Definitely live is worse than dead for a daily use in terms of monoterps, as it takes a toll on your lungs. It's corrosive. It eats organic matter, and you get people wheezing and feeling all sort of weird effects from smoking for a while. And again, it did not start from the solventless. It started from the live resin days, where you get those massive sliding terpene layers, and people are just mesmerized by it. It's a nice look. It's okay to taste it, but to consume that on a daily, especially on the red hot days, that definitely had handicapped enough people now that are trying to go into solventless live, now that live is super popular, and they're getting the same thing. I was like, I'm feeling slightly better, but I don't seem to be able to hit 4 or 5 dabs in a row. Something is off, or I just can't bring myself to do it. And that's exactly why the concentration of terps and monoterps is not meant to be consumed that much.
I
And
think
like
that's
how many people are working with land race strains, like to your point as well. You know what I mean? Like we've done selective breeding and we've bred everything away from the actual
So
true land races.
land race aside, most of the strains that was grown, at least in the last 10 years, maybe I'm wrong about the duration, you've seen things test for 18% THC, 20 something. That's like okay numbers. Now you bring those numbers to people. It's like, you want me to smoke boof? You want me to smoke mids? It's never the case like that, because People
Well,
were,
and I think in the 60s and 70s, the weed that then was like 6 or 7%.
Oh yeah, I mean it was so low. I mean, best of high times in the 70s is the one of the funniest things that'll make you know laugh out loud. But I think that happens with all things, and didn't really draw the comparison between you know food not occurring in nature and definitely these varietals that we're breeding. You know wouldn't occur naturally in nature, and I think that that's a really cool comparison. And you know you're not the first person to come on and talk about the corrosiveness of dabbing uh, high terpene content uh, extracts at high temperatures. And you know we're good friends with Harry Rose of Rosette Wellness, and you know he's been through a number of issues. I think COPD being one of them, and now he can't dab. The only way he can consume is through the Indux Labs Reflux, which is an induction heating unit that he can consume his hash through. But you know he also has the comment around live and dead, and you know I'm a heavy user and I smoke a lot of rosin, and as long as my rosin is clean and it's from a good trusted source, which it always is, I I haven't had any, you know, I haven't had issues, knock on wood. Um, and you know, but I'm very aware of what temperatures I'm dabbing at, but you know, everybody's different. I think that's really an interesting aspect. I wanted to get back to um, your process and your journey and your process. Air drying specifically. You know, we've got a lot of ground to cover still, just in house technique alone. But talk a little bit about your journey through air drying and honing that technique, and you know, go into as little or as much detail as you care to.
All right. So after being frustrated with multiple trials and some strain not working and some of them being my favorite terps, I thought that I need to own a freeze dryer. So I got one. And luckily I ended up with two. And after that, and many trials, making melt, making rosin, making everything from air dried to freeze dried, I found myself slowly withdrawing from using my freeze dryers, which I invested a good amount in having. And yeah, it's just sitting there like a couch or a chair. I would use it if I'm dealing with high volumes or subpar resin. If I know the resin is fire, I would definitely do it in air drying just because I found a better impression, a better high, and a better stability, most of all. Because I thought maybe my drying was off, and then I get the freeze drying, and then I get the same results. Why is it nucleating? Until I had to do some research, and luckily stumbled upon Simply Atom microscopic shot of a resin head from fresh from the freeze dryer, and under the scope you could see the terps escaping, and he said basically that happened because I'm not sure if he said that exactly, but what I understood was the vacuum pressure and the severe freezing temperatures. It has either penetrated the resin heads or the pressure has cracked the resin heads. And when it's cracked,
Yeah, or made it more delicate, I think is what he said. Like, yeah, it's like a shriveled grape now.
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And
Shout out Simply Adam.
shout out. And from there, I had to focus more on the air drying just because it all's making sense to me now. I think the tech is fine of what I'm doing. I just gotta run the same strain multiple times to know if the results are the same. Same crop, different crop, same grower, different grower. And strain aside, air dried has been always stable. So I think I done that. We have here, not sure if you could see.
That's greasy.
Yeah. So that's a rosin grade hash from Live. from Maple Melt's garden. That was sour strawberry number 4. And we called that grape mojito because the resemblance of grapes and some sort of alcohol tequila like nose in there too. And yeah, so that been sitting for, so I think I had this in October. Yeah, around October.
Is
Are
that
you
just air dried and cured?
Yeah, air dried, unpressed. It's just granulated resin. It was fluffy and then
Okay.
collapsed,
Okay.
and then the
Wait,
grease.
and left out at room temperature this whole time?
Yeah, it's been on room temperature since then in the same jar, never moved,
That's dope.
and
That's
and it's live, and it's still there. So that was one of the stable strains that I worked with. That didn't really matter if it was live or dead, room temperature, or fridge.
Are you sieving or are you microplaning?
You can do both. For at least to get the aesthetics, but I prefer sieving because my hands are too hot and my fingers get easily hot with a glove, without a glove, with double gloves.
Adam talked about this. There's some people that just have hot hands and they can't fucking do it.
Yeah, yeah. It depends on. I'm not really sure what it depends on. Some days my hands are cold. It's perfect for hash. Sometimes it's super hot and just it is what it is. Maybe it's the washing intensity. Maybe it's my choice of foods for the last few days. Many factors. But I rather do sievings most of the time just because I tend to lose less hash on my fingers that way. But you still lose some to the spoon. You lose some to the to the colander or whatever you're using.
So Chevy, before we move on, what I want to touch on what you think. Do you believe that the freeze dryer is something that can be dialed in to the point where it is doing that resin justice, or do you feel it has an Achilles heel that cannot be overcome?
So I believe the process is super rushed. And not saying that air dried should be like a 2 weeks drying process, because I got some stuff that are perfectly dry in a couple of days. Some stuff needs a long time, up to 2 weeks. But either or, I believe if the duration could be adjusted, I mean, the easy fix is a freezer, a walk-in freezer, which not everyone could afford, and you just do everything in a walk-in freezer and forget about it. And you're gonna come back to it in a week, in 2 weeks. It's perfectly dry and perfectly light color and all that. I think that would be just the nice, easy way to go about it. Make it and forget it. But have a lot of space and a walk-in freezer. Can the freeze dryer be dialed up? Some hash makers believe it's a matter of settings, which can be the case. And some hashes can stay forever stable after freeze drying. My conclusion would be it's the sheen of resin when the hash melts is what's creating that protective layer. Same concept Frenchie talked about temple bowls, as we have done it in all over Middle East, Nepal. They didn't have fancy jars. They didn't have cellophane wraps. They didn't have anything. They just used goat skin or pouches or just leave it loose and whatever. And he mentioned that the protective shiny resin layer is what's protecting the high quality the hash on the inside and not allowing oxygen to penetrate as much or ever with that layer. And this is where I would say where people assume that freeze dryer could be dialed in. They could be, but I believe it's mainly because the resin has greased and it's just maintaining its integrity under that sheen layer. So
kind of like a temple ball.
Yeah, a
but
temple ball, or like the case over here that has greased up from the bottom, from the top, from all sides. I'm not
So it has
digging
that
into
skin.
it.
Once that has that forms that skin, it just has that and
Yeah,
that's
like
nice
a
protective.
fruit leather type of effect where.
Yeah.
Now, what about machine washing versus hand washing? What do you do and why?
So, ideally for a melt, you always want to hand agitate. You can use the machine too if your machine is somewhat advanced in terms of speed, and if you have that chef or cook sense in terms of understanding your ingredients and the container it goes into, or the vessel. So hand agitation, small scale, will always be winning, but it's an issue for scalability. Could you achieve good results from hand washing to machine washing? It's possible, but you're going to need two factors. If the machine is advanced, and the other factor is the hash maker. If they could do the proper ratios of ice, water, and flour. Now, Peli Polar are leading the way in iceless washes. Shout out Peli Polar. And I believe that would have made things less dirty and less crammed in the vessel, because ice do take a good space.
Okay, before we move on, I want to wrap up air drying. And when we first met, we
Yes.
basically just talked for 5 hours straight, you and I.
Yeah.
And I just was so fascinated. And one of the things that stuck out to me was you taste your hash as it's air drying.
Yeah.
And I want you to explain to the listening public why you do that and how that came about.
So I usually have a different set of microns for my melts, and most people would say it's
What's your bag sets? Like, share your bag sets with us, please.
so I use the Bubble Man set, and what is the other one? Rosin Evolution. Those would be the two brands that I've been using mainly. I didn't get the ice extract. I think I've tried other brands. The bold bags are definitely where it's at, if I can always have it, but Bubble Man is far more available, and I'm in Vancouver, so I'm lucky I could walk into the store whenever I want. So I have all the bag sets from the 220 to the 25, everything in between. What do I wash? What bags? That depends on my tasting tech. So I would observe the flower up close, sometimes with the loop, and then I assume it's going to be that micron, because you see me producing things as 220 to 120, and some are 190 to 90, some are 73, 160. And how am I doing all these decisions? It's the tasting part. So as it's in the collection bag, before I scoop it out, I get a piece and I chew on it, and from there I should be able to tell. You can actually tell the stalks from the resin head, from the plant matter contamination. You don't need a sophisticated palate, because it's just a matter of teeth feel, and our teeth are rich in nerve ends where you could actually feel and tell. And from there, this is how I usually do all my calls for melt. I try it out in that assumed back set, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it goes back into the bucket and then get received again through different bags. I do not prefer.
So you're feeling for meltiness and grittiness. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah, you can tell if the heads are waxy,
Wow.
if they're mainly oily. There's how can you? It took me at least, probably since my starting my hash journey until today. I'm still learning, but it took at least a solid year to be able to understand. But again,
Very cool.
other people do that. I do not know, and I do not want to encourage that, because I've seen how people are having allergic reactions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if it's the best fitting way to test, but at least that's my way. Eat some hash and try to figure out what backsetting does it work. It's not a scientific way, but
No,
the same way.
I bet it is, though, a little bit scientific, because how do you tell if a pearl is a real pearl?
How? Huh.
Rub it on your teeth. A real pearl will have like grit to it.
Uh-huh.
and a fake pearl will always be polished because no matter what it is.
Okay. Then yeah,
So like
there's
and that's been done for like thousands of years.
Okay. The reason I'm doing that stems from my culinary background. I never had any culinary education. It's been influenced by family.
The Major General says we should get a microscope, but we're looking at the natural way of doing things. Look, feel, smell, taste.
Yeah, exactly. At some point, if that's if that's gonna go into a bigger scale, it helps to know your data better, and definitely those instruments are necessary to have some tangible information. For now, I am doing it out of passion. The same way when it comes into cooking. So for example, my cooking and chefing history starts from way young, helping in family businesses until I came to Canada, tried different restaurants, and I have never been a measurement guy. It's been always to taste and estimation, and usually, tasting aside, it's a matter of nose too. Usually, I shouldn't be able to tell what proper combination would fit together by smelling this and smelling that, and that's how it comes when I'm mixing some strains too. I would usually rub two different strains together in my hand and trying to imagine how that would end up. It's not the most accurate way, but it's a way to tell. Let's say you have a small wash of different stuff, or you just trying to get something new that are not out there in terms of flavor.
So resin mixing and pre-wash and post-wash is something that we try and talk about every episode, because everybody has a different opinion on it, and it's clearly something that you're a fan of. Is it something that you think is gonna become more prevalent in the space, where you're gonna see more people doing mixes? And is there a difference that you've found between mixing material pre-wash and post wash?
Yeah. So, for example, I believe that our palate has a capacity, and the more terps get mixed in, you get lost into the terps. Sometimes it doesn't taste like anything distinctive. It just tastes like a generic strain, and sometimes it tastes really good. That definitely requires lab testing and study it from a terpene perspective. What are the ratios that are working together and whatnot. Because I remember something in science, I'm not sure if it was a deadly, no, it was not deadly gas. I think it was more of the sulfur or that the stink in gas, in farts, basically. So it's so the component responsible for the stinky, the components responsible for that stinky smell are very minimal, and scientists try to isolate that and try to increase the concentration of it. It turned from stinky to somewhat sweet. It went from stinky to sweet to no smell, which I want to believe the same for terpenes. They start at a certain flavor. They might progress to be some good flavor, but maybe the terps are too much, and then you don't end up recognizing the profiles as they're naturally made in nature. And from there, that's my stance on mixing. Is it going to be better in the future if it's studied and documented and has been tested? Until then, I don't expect it to always work for mixing.
Would you prefer to have it? Would you prefer to make that mix before you put the material into the wash bin, or would you make them separate and then try them separately and mix them accordingly?
My journey has been always about trying things head on. It's good to test, but my science is in reverse. I like to go with my gut feel. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, I revisit that and see what were the problems. It's not the best model if you do not get the same material always, or at least from different crops or different growers. But it's hard to tell. Yeah, it's hard to tell if you don't have a consistent amount of material.
That's fair. I want to talk about rosin.
Yeah.
when did that come onto your radar?
So people have always been fascinated with the hash varieties, but some other people I know used to take the hash and squish it and then say, have you tried to squish that? It's very nice. I didn't find the need for it, but it seemed like what the Canadian consumers like. They do enjoy the easy way, easy cleaning, easy smoke, super terpy, and all these things. So it had started upon requests, but for me, I didn't feel like it. I did it. I did it before anyone had to tell me anything about it, but it was not something I was considering to always dish out, but I wanted to try it. And my first rosin was with a hair straightener and hash. So I had the 25 blotting screens. I had some spares, so I cut it and I made a hash square about 1 gram, and I put that into a hair straightener and I squished it out. And I was super intrigued and fascinated by what came out. It was super shiny. It's like shatter, but it's not shatter. And all these thoughts that I've been having for a first experience. I tried it. It was super pleasant, but it felt still incomplete for me. It can get super ripped. It's a satisfying high, but being used to hash more than rosin, I did not feel the need to always squish everything, because I would like to go by two concepts: is you always have more hash than rosin, and if the grower is growing fire, it should always be good enough to consume as hash. The trade would be some residue, but you can't have everything working. And the second thing is the concept of whole fruit and juice. Rosin is juice, and it doesn't hold up as well. Luckily, it's not fiber, it's waxes, so it will hold up good in a freezer and over time, as opposed to the actual fruits and veggies. When you freeze them, the cellulose, the water content in it, will expand 5 times, and it will penetrate the cell walls, and it will leak out chlorophyll if you're washing. And in terms of food, it will make it mushy. And the whole mush thing, because the whole cell structure has been eviscerated with all these icicles, the micro icicles. So yeah. So what do they do, for example, in the drinks and juice industry? They cannot preserve the flour differently. You cannot freeze it, so they turn everything into a juice, and then they concentrate it and they freeze it, or they make it into a powder.
Okay, so let's build on this, because you've got a tremendous amount of experience with resin and a really interesting view on things. We had Brett Bird on our show, and it was one of the cooler experiences we had, and he really changed, I think, each of our perspectives a little differently, but each of our perspectives.
But he used the same words. He used the exact same words.
Use very, very similar words. So I wanted to know, Bird is a big proponent that you can only age or cure hash. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot age or cure rosin. Rosin is simply degrading.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you agree with, that statement?
Exactly. That's why TM hash all the way. Rosin would be more of a commodity. Same thing with produce. The reason we have juices and all these things and all the processed food, because food has changed from nourishment to a commodity. So same thing with hash, but it works in the opposite way, because you definitely want the whole fruit, you don't want the juice, because the juice do not hold up as well. I think so. My perspective on whole hash, full spec, selective micron, um, what I would like to convey to cannabis users is the following: the waxes are not necessarily a bad thing. People say it chas my banger, it's a hassle to clean. Then they'll find many excuses. But on the same note, you'll always have more hash, for starters, and secondly, the waxes work as safety brakes. the only way you would scorch hash if you hit it at an overly hot temperature where it should not, because that would be smoking, and smoking hash in a dab rig is the most unpleasant thing. It needs its own setup. But coming back to that, you should be enjoying hash full spec or selective micron and dab it and not worry about the waxes, because actually those are the safety brakes for your lungs and for the ultimate experience without getting too much or too little. That's where the whole temperature with hash smoking.
You'll know if it's too hot, because it'll show you it's too hot.
Yeah, you'll get the taste, and you don't need to scorch your banger to know it's too hot. Sometimes you're going to get the popcorn flavor or the there's always an unpleasant type of flavor.
Like when you over-vaped your weed in the vapes back in the day.
Same concept. I didn't vape as much. I don't know what that is like, but I tried the Volcano, and yeah, I know. Let's say the first run is not the same as the second run, and it's the least pleasant thing. Get you higher, but it's the least pleasant thing. So same thing with hash. It's the matter of just trying to evaluate the product for what you have, for the capacity of your market and the country. Because, for example, the whole melt star system standards for melt are always built upon the American market and super selective micron. They have outdoors, they have abundance, we don't. The star system is not the most accurate one. I would love to go by percentages over star rating, just because we do not have that much, and if we get quality resin, you can only have so much.
What do you mean, Chevy, percentages?
So it will be from 0 to 100%, and that's how I would want to rate the melt, rather than trying to go with a star system that it's only 6 stars. It's just an awkward number to try to evaluate it. And how do you tell that?
I think it was 5 and 6 got added because there was some really fire shit.
Yeah.
I didn't know that part of history, but yeah, I mean, if you're going to keep increasing numbers, just stick to a percentage system and skip all that.
Do you see hash growing both North America and globally specifically in the solventless space, or do you feel the pressure of rosin encroaching on the hash space?
I definitely see hash thriving, and growers are aiming to focus on resin quality than just flower aesthetics for those who grow just for flower packs, as opposed to hash derived operation, because rosin is an issue to store, and the only time you can have rosin if you store hash. And I believe rosin should be something on demand rather than just squished and left, for those who are going to wonder.
Now that's the life, buddy. I like the way you are talking. Let's have rosin on demand, and make it the norm that melt is everywhere and super accessible. You go to the store and it's just freezers stacked full of melt, and one day it'll just be like scoops. Oh, how many scoops would you like, Jameson?
I would hope so.
The amount of infrastructure needed for that is mind-boggling, but that's paradise.
Where do you see the future of the solventless space, Chevy? Like, do you not just the solventless space, but the concentrate space in general? Do you see it growing considerably from where it is today, or do you see it remaining, a more of a niche way of consuming things?
So from the looks of it, someone as myself and all the other brands that started the same time as me, maybe after, maybe before, the accessibility to knowledge is far more out there than it used to be. So definitely it's going to progress way more than what we know it today.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it's a matter of education and understanding each market and country's capacity. Canadian market should be based upon Canadian standards, and the US market is on its own standards for environmental, genetic, and processing reasons. And the way I would see hash progressing in the future as growers start to be more conscious about the resin integrity, the more people starting to push towards hash, which is actually happening right now. Say rosin has been popping up for the first quarter of 2021, and after that, it's been a massive hash blunt, full melt demand.
I think it's time to get into some of these.
I was just about to say.
Time to get into some of these hash blunts and caviars and things like that. So
no, the wraps and the blunts first, because there's a whole level to that. Because that, as I said, it reintroduced the market, and I mean, you know, RJ and I talk about this, I think, quite a bit and have for some time. What does the market look like as far as, you know, sales? Flour and pre-rolls is probably the biggest, and then you talk about, okay, in concentrates, what is it going to be? Is it going to be solventless? And RJ and I agree.
But like, what's a true representation of the market? Like we have to think
yours,
about like what the market was. Like the true representation of what the market was is pre-legalization in Canada. Honest opinion. You know what I mean? Because like then we actually see what the market drives. It's not. It's still this big of a market, right? It's not this big of a market. But when you look at what it was primarily extract and high quality flour, and then you know you had your optics on the edibles and the dosages of the edibles, and then instead of using all of that data that existed out there, they just went with whatever they created, and you know what I mean. And then now we don't have an accurate representation of the market. We just have the people that will go into the legal dispensaries for what they can and want to access, versus the premium products don't exist. They're starting to, okay? They're starting to.
This is something that has crossed categories. Like this is something that from BHO smokers to solventless heads to purely flour smokers, we all can identify that we've had one of these and this is exceptional and we all enjoy it. And
to hash snobs like myself, when it comes into flour, I don't like flour. This has flour in it, and I'm okay smoking it because the flavor of the hash and the smell is completely overshadowing that chlorophyll part that I dislike about flour.
So take us through the evolution of this Chevy as in as much detail as you can on your journey.
To when, why, and how.
Brian, can you bring him up?
So
in big screen.
Yeah. Hold on.
So the way these came to life was when I forgot my rolling bowl and rolling papers. I only had my hash and tobacco, and I have had a quality of hash that I was not super satisfied with. It was super old material, and I just wasn't sure what to do with it. It sat as a brick for the longest time, and I had some granulated. So I recall seeing, what's his name, Cypress Hill, rolling one of those before concerts, and that's where it all kicked off. And
wait, he used to roll those?
Yes, but it was like black hash, super thick, big thick hash wrap, and
so silly shit.
So it was a functional product, but definitely, I mean, it did not look aesthetically appealing, and it was just too much hash for the consumer, even in a group, to be able to have that much to smoke in one setting. So yeah, I've seen that, and also there's Pixie Sticks. Shout out Pixie Sticks in Cali. They have been the one leading the hash wraps game, but their market is more about their exotic line and their top quality hash made into those wraps. And I like the approach they had, but also from my background, where I come from, cannabis is not as abundant, and whatever you have, you gotta cherish it. And that's was my conclusion, to make those in a different twist rather than try and aim and replicate the same high-end product they have. I wanted to utilize the lower grade material. So yeah, a very lucky sequence of events, from losing my bowl to me wanting to get medicated to few thoughts to people that I've been witnessing, and I tried the hash. It was not the most perfect consistency, but it smoked and it felt amazing. And for hash that I would estimate around like $5-10 a gram, I looked at it from the high perspective. Definitely that is worth way more. And not that hash was necessarily cheap, but you look at it and that's the first impression you get. That's cheap hash. But apparently there was a better way to consume that. Especially that the Canadian market is super confused when it comes into hash. They look at it, they don't know what to do with it. They just put it in a bowl, maybe make a snake. But that's about it for smoking. Our kind of hash smoking is very interactive. You inspect the piece. Some of them needs heating, some of them don't, some of them need extra work. So you evaluate your hash, you burn it, you mix it. There's a proper ratio to tobacco to hash. There is a certain amount that you could roll in before the flavors start to change and whatnot. So that experience was missing from here, and to be able to convey the same culture of why do we love hash and why is it so interactive and we're smoking it that much was going to take so long to convey. So people like flour and they like pre-rolls here. So definitely the way I thought about it, that's best of both worlds. Especially it was at a time where pre-rolls are dying and people looking at it as mids product just because you could put whatever in there and people are going to smoke it. They're not going to ruin their pre-roll. And that was the whole kickoff for the blunts. I found the right fit for it, and I wasn't sure if it was going to kick off, but I kept at it until today. It's been over 2 years, and I've been pushing it as hard as I'm pushing full melt, unrosin, and other stuff. I had to believe in the product first, and secondly, I had to present the product to a market that is confused about hash, but would definitely benefit and want to smoke it. So the product could be made from the top quality quad flour, and it could be made from the shittiest shit. It could be ice water, it could be sift, it could be a mix of both. The possibilities are endless. It comes into scalability. If you could make the same product on a massive commercial scale, or if um, what is the other point? And as you try to shape it, as you see, it's a clean cut product. It was a good shape. It's cut into squares or a rectangle shape. But basically, the offcuts you have, what Pixie's been doing, they've been taking those offcuts and using it as hash strips instead of hash snakes or something you top your bowl with. I kind of like the idea, but that's not the consistency I like to present hash with. There's people for it. People are going to want it that way, but everything that has been done under the brand on my hash journey is definitely biased towards my liking. So everything that's been made is things that I like, not necessarily shaped by the market, because that's what I feel the most and like to get. This is how I like to get high the most, and from there, some people like the movement and they will join from hash to hash blunt to full melt, and some would not, and that's completely fine. Luckily, we don't all have to agree on the same thing, and we could all still be cool.
Absolutely. So you have a number of other interesting processes that I want to touch on, but one of those is your fresh, not frozen harvest and processing.
Yes.
That's something that's incredibly interesting to me, and I know it's a time-consuming venture for you, and I'd love to hear more about it and how it came about.
Yeah. So I'll let that rest here. So right here is, I'm not sure if it's focusing. So right here we have Platinum Girl Scout fresh, non-frozen, from a year and 2 months ago. I was keeping that in the fridge most of the time, but it's been out for the last week. And it's been relatively cold here, so it was not hard to maintain.
I think that's caviar, not roe.
Yeah, that's the caviar?
Yeah, that is caviar. The place is getting overly smoky, even though for a single. Anyway, so that is caviar, fresh, non-frozen. I think that was 90 to 190, and that was the start of the whole caviar movement. So, what was special about it? I didn't believe anything was special until I had to do it multiple times. What was actually special was my labor and time consumed, because the process take me at least 10 hours the day I decide to do it, from hitting the garden to choosing the plants I want to wash to lining it properly, cool enough that I could transport it. The way I used to make it is a cooler, a layer of ice, flour, ice, flour, ice, flour, ice, until the cooler is full, and then just go at it and go ahead and wash. That's the first part. The second part is getting into washing, and after washing, you get into the drying part. It's the most stubborn resin consistency you could work with, and it's insanely loud compared to when it freezes.
How is it in the wash barrel? Is it different?
The effect is heavenly. Like, if I really like to wash for terps, that's exactly the recommended dose, where I think one wash is enough. And not because the terps are too much and it's tiring, but it's such a satisfactory feeling from the time that I had to wake up early to get the job done until I'm done washing and drying, and I just could rest. And definitely, I mean, the most I have is just some sugar drinks. I don't even eat during that period. Why am I going through all that? Is just the vibe I'm going with. Heavily consumed in the process. I'm okay doing it. And the whole part of it started because I been seeing live rosin pop a lot. I wanted to make it. I'm known for hash, sometimes hash rosin. I wanted to get into the live train as well, but I didn't want to necessarily copy everyone. And I wanted to have my own twist, which is just don't freeze it. It's a tedious process. It's not scalable, but everything is usually done for myself and for my personal gratification. So I was okay with it with the time I spent it.
How much louder are you finding that terp profile from, say, that same profile fresh frozen? Have you done those side-by-side comparisons?
Yeah, at least a 20% difference, at least. And the best, I think I've had almost a 50-50 difference. But again, I believe that was crop related.
Did your yield go down like considerably?
Most people are worried about that. They said, how would you get proper yield? How? So coming back to the concept of freezing, you freeze the flour and then you do a thawing period, which is going to take about a few minutes, 5 minutes, maybe 10, depending on how massive your flour and how you clipped it. Guess what? The temperature is going to go down to the same temperature in the bucket. So whoever says that by freezing it, you knock the heads easier and faster, I don't think so. I think you are damaging the cellulose and leaking out chlorophyll, because I could beat on that and wash it with a drill if you even wanted to, and it's not going to get as green as a frozen material would.
So do you let the material rest and kind of like bloom, so to speak? Like this time, you know what I mean? Like, do you kind of
It's already bloomed, bro.
No. Like tea. Like, you know what I mean? Like he would like put a frozen piece of like cannabis in the water and it would just like open. You know what I mean?
True.
Or do you give it the trike tickle?
So that it sounds more like dried than live, because live is already with water content. So The only thing that changes is the ice buildup in between the flour, and most people say you need to thaw it because there is trichomes stuck between those and those ice chunks. So that's why it needs to thaw, so you can get everything out of it. But yeah, I don't think freezing is necessary. If it was for me and I had access to a garden where I could wash on site instead of having to transport it for an hour drive where the grower is, it is just too much work. And yeah, if I could at least reduce the driving part, I could be making it more. But I just do it whenever I want to feel something special, and it's been fairly easy to get caviar with that. But also, it's super hard for air dried because everything is super sticky. Same thing when you touch a plant, or you just brush by one, you get all sticky and smeary resin. You can't even feel anything. It's just like some sticky mess. Same thing when you collect it. It sometimes it ruined the bags. Sometimes it sticks to everything. And I never use the cold room. I always wash whenever I feel like it. I believe if your vessel and process is fast enough, you can get away with it. So yeah, cold room is never a necessity. Just be fast enough and calculated. Like I think about it before I go to sleep. The day I wash, I orchestrate the whole plan in my head. I'm gonna wake up. I'm gonna get there. This is gonna happen, and then when I'm drying, I even go down to the drying part in my brain. Some sort of shadow boxing, but just trying to.
The great trichrome escape.
Yeah.
So if you build it, they will come. You're just building that mental
You think
game up
about it,
and
right?
just executing. I like that.
Which I want to believe that's that's some sort of, let's say, special power when it comes into those odd microns that I pull. I believe I just manifested enough when it happens. Probably it's not like that, but I would rather always go with that belief. It's always good to have a magical or personal connection with what you're making, regardless of being true or not. But if it helps enhance the quality in what you're doing, do what you believe in. But
Absolutely.
when it comes down to science and comparison, people get lost in those lines. And I was like, no, my process and my work, and yeah, I like to believe most of the work that I do is built between me and the grower. After the first few crops, we work together. We sit down. I show him everything. This happened because of that. I have no understanding of growing. I never even grown a tomato, but my connection with the grower is where he could translate my data into workable information for his grow.
Yeah.
And that was also carried by Frenchie, because that's the most crucial thing about hash making, he said, because he didn't talk about hash making as you grow and wash your own. It was the connection between you and the grower, where I want to believe hash making is such an extensive knowledge and a very it's very sensitive process when it comes into those tiny details that make the product perfect. But I would love to immerse myself in hash as much as possible. I would love to get into growing, but maybe in a couple of years, maybe a decade, I believe I want to grow then. It doesn't hurt to learn right now, but I don't have the space or the means for it. So I'm just befriending the growers and offering them products that they have never seen before from their own work. Because what I felt common with a lot of growers is they feel sad when, if they could witness the product, they see all the flour, I wash it, then dump it. And I was like, man, that's all the flour. You're done with it? It's all gone? Yeah, it's all gone. Can't do much about it. When you spend 3-4 months trying to grow it and then you see it getting wasted.
Absolutely. I know you're friends with George Greenthumb.
Yes.
You utilize his backwashing, or not his, but the backwashing technique that he's proud of?
Yeah. I don't say I usually do it. I would do it. Say you will have unfortunate washes where you get that green hue in your hash, which is, you can notice it visibly, and if you rinse it hard, you could see it separating, but it's still in the bag.
Yeah.
And that's where the backwash comes in. When I want to make my hash look less green, I definitely have to do it. But in terms of cleaning my resin for melt, 90% of everything of my content is just regular washes, and the other 10% will be back washes. It's good as a strategy if you happen to not be in tune with your skills, if you're not in tune with everything. Definitely some fuck ups are going to happen, and this is where a backwash is definitely helpful.
Absolutely.
And it makes a big difference for rosin more than hash, because rosin seems to carry that clearly and the flavor transfer as opposed to the hash part. And the hash might look green, but it will taste less green than rosin ever will.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. You have coined the term caviar and roe.
Yeah.
Some of your offerings. Can you talk about that? Why you did that, and what the meaning behind those are?
So the term caviar, I've been holding on it for the longest time. So say I've been making full melt for the last 2 years. I maybe had it for the last year, but I didn't want to talk about it because it was widely used for solvent based, and I wasn't too keen on calling a high quality full melt caviar. But again, that's the first thought until I just have to sit down and think more about it, the same way about our Canadian standard compared to the US standards. I don't think the caviar term is well deserved for solvent based, because the formation, while it might look nice, it definitely is not how caviar would look like. And slowly I gathered the courage when I've been getting recognition from high figures in the cannabis industry about how nice it looks. And that was the start of it, on trying to push the caviar term for full melt rather than solventless, because the aesthetics and the process it goes through and the pricing that goes along, because caviar is still grades. I have a saying that goes by, every caviar is roe, but not all roe is caviar. So caviar would be the first pull, 90% melt quality or more, and roe would be the second pull, rosin grade, full spec, everything that comes after the caviar.
Brian, could you pull up some of those photos from his IG? So take us through these, Chevy. This is the This is the caviar.
Yes.
Yeah. So what micron is that? Go back to that one.
Yeah. So go back. So that one was probably one of the very pleasant washes I have had. That was LeGros Studios' first personal plant, and I had the privilege to run that. So that was an outdoor live plant, fresh frozen, and that was the first pull on 90 to 160 micron. I did a second pull and it looked just as good, but that definitely went to rosin because his preferred smoke is rosin. But that one. So, what is the question on that one?
No, I just wanted to take us through the caviar, and then the difference between the caviar and the roe, and so
cool.
Now we have some pictures for reference here.
Cool. So yeah, that is caviar, definitely, because that was the first pull, 90 to 160, and it got all the parameters that I would consider the caviar: the sheen, the color, the formation, and the miltiness and terpene. The terpene content and transfer on those ones are far superior than than the second pull and whatnot. So not just because it's first pull, there's few factors that has to go through to
the one in the top right there, Brian.
The top right is also a caviar that was from Maple Melt Garden Skittles, and that was a really nice up close shot. Definitely, it makes me more in tune with the process whenever I can get macro shots, so you can get to see it how it looks like up close, because people think, oh, when you do the air dry, is it single heads? Those are fat heads. Those are the biggest heads ever. I wish, because that would make it so easy and very little to no contamination. As you can see here, there's some air bubbles, and then there's those reddish dots. Those are amber heads, as you see it. So yeah, it's just
That's incredible. That's such a cool shot.
Yeah. So yeah, to clarify for everyone wondering about caviar, it is not single heads. They are a cluster of heads together. And you can always see that in the first few shots. Yeah, this one you could see those dots.
Yeah.
Very little contamination, and the rest would be the amber color on certain heads.
So it shows you the size of a real head. That's incredible.
Yeah. And from there, I would like to add is where I believe the stability for air dry comes, because it already had done that greasing sheen already that is protecting the resin on the inside. And the only time it would escape if it did not create that seal fully and it was not dried properly. Or it could be the terpene composition, things like hazes and Congos, aside from the very little yield, but they do not love room temp and they tend to nucleate always.
Interesting. So, are there any other?
So everything we've viewed so far is caviar. I'm not sure if I have roe on there. Yeah, here. So that one on the above. Yeah, the one above that. Yeah. What's the micron there? Yeah, I think that was 220 to 160. So that would be considered roe grade, because that was the accumulation of 5 pulls together from the first wash to the last wash. I didn't clean or collect the 160. It was just like wash after wash after wash and just accumulated. That was not backwashed. It was just a super clean upper micron. You can see some visible stalks in there, and not super nice. So close it want to be caviar, but definitely it's not there.
That's very cool. That's I like that separation. I think that makes sense to me.
I would like to add something aside from having those bigger microns to show your skill as a hash maker, or the skill of the grower that made those nice big heads to exist at that meltiness. Okay, there is you can see here more heads in detail in that. So that's the loose resin row on that 160 220.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a pleasure running that strain. And that's another thing, the reason I want to collab with as much people as possible. I've seen this and many other people's work. I want to see more of it. Such a visual eye candy. Any nice word you want to say. It's Madame Frenchie used to describe it as
Gorgeous, just gorgeous.
the same way we feel about babies when you look at a baby animal or a baby human and you get that kind of peace, nice feel. She associated that with the caviar aesthetics, and she believed that is a secondary part of, or just a whole nother level of cannabis indulgence, where you can get the smell, you can get the high and the taste, and you can also get the visual aspect of it.
Wow. What is this here we're looking at?
What it says.
Is that more row?
Still the same row.
Wow,
Yep.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that's more just from afar, not as up close.
Okay. So I want to talk about another cool product that you've coined a term for and are moving forward with is the AHO, the activated.
You put it together over there. I was just calling it activated hash. You took the words together from SHO to AHO, and it was brilliant. It was brilliant. So yeah, that product was born.
You're too kind.
Yeah, that term was born because we had to link and chat for 5 hours, which I encourage more people to do, and I would love to see and meet with more like-minded individuals, because the possibilities are endless. The product development, everything could be pushed to a further refined product, where whether it's an idea, a process, a hint, that's where I see the evolution of it. Yeah, that is.
I'm in Okanagan. I'm gonna come see you soon.
Anytime, please come. Bring Jameson if you can too. But I don't think you want to leave his
Pick me up on the way.
alone too.
I'll come pick you up. Oh man, it's so. But yeah, talk about this and how it came about and what is it?
So this is actually a newer product, which is a mix of AHO and solventless diamonds. The diamonds were from High Fidelity. Shout out to them. And that was derived by the caviar, but on a concentrate level. I mean, on a non-hash level, more like rosin. So yeah, it looked like salmon eggs, and it's not really focusing, but you could see the round, almost perfect spheres of THCA diamonds and hash. All this is basically the grade of hash you would squish as rosin, but instead of squishing it as rosin, just smoke it as hash, and you have more. From a business standpoint, let's say you have the commercialization of a product, to have rosin or to have hash with 20% more yield. It's a business decision you got to make, especially if it's good grown resin. Your chances in capitalizing on that are far better, and a way to boost about your quality, because all the juices on the market, all the canned tomatoes, you never know what qualities are they. So you go and get your own tomatoes and you consume them as they are, or you make the sauce yourself. And this is the whole evolution of concentrates, where I feel it should head more into caring about the resin quality, where you could smoke the resin. There's more of that fire. There's 20% to whatever percent more than ever will be in rosin. And it shows the quality you're getting are as good as it can be, because it just translates into melty heads with the flavor and the high and everything. It doesn't have to be first pull 90U 120 for it to be considered not full melt to be considered melt. Full melt would definitely be coined for the caviar, and then anything under that would be for the raw grade. It can be full melt, but it's not going to be that 90% and above mark. But it's a gateway for people that want to get into full melt and enjoy it, but don't want to spend the same amount.
And it's a dabbable option on the go. I mean, try taking full melt with you to the beach, and
yeah,
you need a cooler. You need ice packs.
Especially if you paid for it, you want to cherish that as much as you can, because I would feel the pain of having a nice quality hash that nucleates, because it's still going to be nice and great, but you could not. It has a time limit before it loses its peak. When it nucleates, it's at its peak of terpene and high and everything, and then it goes way down after, if it's not consumed in a timely manner. So what was the point I wanted to make?
When I first tried that, I was incredibly impressed. Just the I didn't have the diamonds in sauce. I had just the straight AHO, and it was.
There's no sauce. It's just hash and diamonds.
Yeah, you're right. But yeah, it was a cool experience, because it was malleable and workable like a rosin. But
and you could flag it like it's just carrying with everything.
And it hit
from melt.
Like, of course, it hit like full melt, and it hit like hash. So it was a really cool experience that I think is going to be widely adopted. And I think that just touching back on the dead versus live conversation, and your preference and how your preferences guide, your form factors. I think that dead or cured gland provides a bit more of a calming and less potentially anxiety-ridden effect than some of the live material. And I think that, not only is that probably something that we need globally, as people today, but not everybody consumes cannabis like, Brian or RJ. And so the excessive or the dauntingness of taking a dab or dabbing, and then the comfort of having a more traditional style aged resin that is more of a warm hug and relaxing in the body than, in the heart and the head, I think is really attractive to a lot of people. And I think that's probably, why, I think you've been a part of a bit of a renaissance that is getting people like me and Brian and RJ to try products that we otherwise probably wouldn't go out of our way or, even cross the street to try. And, I really commend you for that.
It's a challenge to bring that product to market, and challenge in terms of people perspective, because some people are going to see it knock on full melt. Some are going to see it as trying to profit more. But in all, what it comes down to is there is more than just that. So, for example, when my full melts can be 220 to 120 or just 160 to 220, it's not just because the grower is great and I can wash things very clean. There is a cannabinoid and terpene compounds in the broader spectrum as you go, where you do not find it in that 120-90 micron. So you could make the cleanest stuff melting, but that doesn't mean you're getting the whole pie. You're getting half of it or a slice. That's why some full spec hits different when you have it. And some people complain about full spec about tasting off or weird. Definitely it does taste weird as rosin, but as hash, again, those safety breaks, the waxes do play a role in reducing that unpleasant kind of flavor. And on top of that, you get the most rewarding high and the most complex terpene profile that you wouldn't normally get on a refined micron. So yeah, I would assume if someone else started that and they didn't have good reputation or were known for quality, definitely they're gonna get those prejudice thoughts on just trying to make something new that is not new. But nothing is old or new. It's just reintroducing processes in different ways. And if it actually makes a difference to the consumer at the end of the day, which I believe it does, at least for the stability, because what's the most people complaining about when it comes into full melt? It's a hassle. You need a freezer, you need a cooler, you need. Well, how about we can process that into an AHO, full spec, full melt, caviar, roe, whatever, and have a stable product for the longest time. The same way people back home have their gooey hash always. So it's more of the better, faster, prettier.
Also problems for shelf stability in a system that isn't getting products to market and to consumers in a timely fashion.
Same thing for the hash blunts. Well, an addition for the hash blunt I would like to mention, it's a product that keeps you thinking. It's pretty helpful for secondary processes, qualities, and microns. You can always use low quality microns, planty, dirty, whatever you name it, and you could make one with it. But can you actually scale it up like that? Because you only have so much 160 or 25 to use in, and that's where the whole incorporation, like you as a hash maker, have a duty to use the plant in the most ways possible. People are already doing that with edibles, but unfortunately they're all squishing it. There's a crazy high that comes from hash and hash alone, but it just depends on the processor if they could use strictly hash for their edibles. And it's a way also to use the rosin pucks. Well, if I didn't tell you, I can even utilize rosin pucks for the hash blunts as well. Everything that could possibly come out as an undesirable or go to edible, I have a fix for it. And if you grow and make hash, you should figure out these things. So not gonna act like
I mean, it makes total sense. It makes total sense. If you think about it,
yeah.
without giving away the tech, Jameson, think about it. It makes absolute fucking sense. I love this. I love you, Chevy. This is fucking killer. Thank you for dropping this tech. That was a huge bomb. That was a huge bomb. I had to stop the presses on that one. Everyone just think about that one for a second. Okay, sorry. I love you. Continue.
No worries. But this is where I think it's sad because, I mean, at some point as a hash maker, you feel threatened in the market by everything is changing so fast, and I'm not sure if I'm keeping up. And everyone else is making rosin, everyone else is making. I, the market is so massive that I think that's why most people do not try to put enough energy on there. Their energy is trying to source more fire, better fire, cream of the crop, but forgetting about all the less fortunate folks.
Yeah, I think that what really is a refreshing perspective that I have only encountered with you, and I get I'm blessed, and I get to talk to a lot of people way smarter than me every fucking day, and most hash makers, if not all, are simply stewards of the resin, and they are simply, if it's cultivated correctly, and I do my job, I'm just passing it along to the end consumer, and I can't make, I'm not turd polishing here. I'm not turning mold into gold. I'm just transferring this along, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think that that's admirable, and I think that that's great. But I think you came with a unique perspective that wasn't maybe a Western perspective, where you said, "Hey, listen, it's great to turn gold into gold, but there's a lot of other less desirable pieces of this animal that need to be addressed and turned into something that could have an audience in what I would argue to be one of the most discerning, like the Canadian legacy consumer is an educated fucking consumer. Like,
exactly. Yeah.
They know what they're talking about. They know what they're looking for. They know what they want. They know what they like, and they know what they don't like. They know what their friends like, and so I think you've done a really cool job taking a look at what everybody's doing and then doing something completely differently, and acknowledging that you can take undesirable work and create something out of that. One of my first questions for you was, does everything have to mechanically separate for you to do what you do? And you said absolutely not. And I found that to be really, really interesting.
Everything can work if you use your brain enough. I would like to equate that to look at the different countries in style, at least in eating. Coming back to the food subject, all other countries that are not Europe or North America consume every part of the animal, every part, everything that people consider a waste product, trimmings and garbage or animal grade food. It stems from the same thing. These areas are not fortunate enough, or they cherish every part of an animal that they gotta make the most out of it. The same goes for cannabis. If you're built into a culture that is about growing all over, and the peace and the safety you can get while practicing that, and in abundance, you just see it everywhere. You could afford to throw roaches. You could afford to um, just smoke top flower or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's a matter of a culture and appreciation to the material you're working with. If it's a plant, if it's an animal, it's still a soul, and it needs to be appreciated. And the best way of appreciation is to reduce waste or eliminate it if possible. And touching back on your subject about hash makers here, I no knock on anyone. All their processes are unique on their own. They make great products. There are certain tweaks that differentiate products than others, but the title of hash maker does not fit most of them, because to take the resin, dry it, squish it, and present it as cold cure, live or dead, that is hardly any hash making process. There is hardly any connection with the outcome product. While hash, in particular the AHO, anything that gets activated, it needs the human factor hardly. And these are not my words. That's where Frenchie's words, that a hash maker job is to take the resin and transform it to hash. Some people say, okay, I can get some resin and make some bricks with it, and that's hash. But have you actually decarbed it properly? A properly pressed, activated, decarbed, decarboxylated, all these terms, is hash that could stay stable for the longest time. Most of the hash bricks that are made, when they nucleate and crumble, it starts gooey, but after a couple of days or a week, it's all leaking terps. And yeah, it's just not what you would associate traditional hash with. That's where most hash makers are not doing their role as hash makers, because they think it's just a matter of like microwave it and try it. That's all. Definitely is more than that. Add your human factor on there, spend enough time, and you have something unmatched, which I believe when most people had liked certain creations more than others, and I believe just because they felt what the same feeling that I get, and I feel proud that I could carry the same vibe with what I'm smoking here to someone on the far ends of Canada, where they get to share the same experience wherever you are, because that's what hash is about. That's why all the old hash heads from the 80s and below remember hash and love hash, because that's what you're familiar with.
We're every maker is curating an experience, and for somebody who, like, resin is my medicine, and I've gone through my own journey and got off everything that I've got off, and I don't even need coffee in the morning. I just need cannabis, and I can tell you that as somebody who consumes a large amount of rosin and plans to continue to till the very day I die, the experience that your products deliver is different in a way that I can feel medically as a medical user. And when I smoke one of those wraps, like, I can feel my eyelids getting heavy. I can feel the sedative effect on my body that is stronger in some ways than even a big dab of GMO. And so I really think that it's resonating with a number of different users, but for a number of different reasons. And I think that it's really cool to kind of see this renaissance happening. And I'm super glad we were able to cross paths and connect, because I really enjoy the perspective that you bring to a space that I love so much.
Glad that you mentioned that part, because coming back to the hash blunt side, like I said, you could make it out of anything and it can work. But do you have an understanding of hash and a hashishine background, aside from scaling it up, utilizing it, reusing it more than one time, so you can always keep up with scalability and whatever you would consider trimmings or offcuts? Instead of selling it as hash, you could reincorporate it again and still make you a better hash blunt, because at this point it gets pressed and it gets re-added to another blend, and that blend is partly activated, and you still activate it to make those wraps again, on and on and on. So you need to have a hashishine background and understanding of what hash should feel like. It's that sense of well-being, as Frenchie described it, the sense of well-being, a warm blanket that envelops you, and a sense of peace. And that was not my first experience with cannabis, and I've been chasing that always. Where's the relaxing part everyone talking about? All I get is my heart is beating hard, I'm paranoid, and I'm having all these odd thoughts. So this is where I felt the hash was missing from a lot of people's diet, including mine. Just need to understand more about hash.
Absolutely, man.
Yeah. So
hash and health.
I would like to correct my previous statement about hash makers. A hash maker is not a hashishine. That would be the way I would definitely correct it. Because a hashishine is a person who have been to producing countries or have experienced the hash from producing countries, and knows how to convey that with whatever tools they're offered in whatever countries they're at. So this is the true meaning of a hashashin, is a person who could utilize the plant from point A to Z and secondary processing, not just making fire and, going home. It's more than that.
Is there a specific place or region in one of these producing countries that if you could, magically just snap your fingers and be there, you'd like to go to and learn from? Or is it more or less just the knowledge of the general area out there?
I haven't been outside certain countries, and I definitely would like to visit them. No experience is little experience. You get to try everyone's impression. The same way I believe in some hash makers' processes, even if it's just rosin, I believe the same for hash out there on a generational level.
Yeah.
You will get the knowledge that has been inherited and passed upon generations, and from there, you could learn and link things in your subconscious and figure out new products. So I would love to be in all producing countries again. It doesn't matter which one in particular. If I have a wish, I wish to get into, to establish how can I say, a presence on the recreational market.
Yeah.
And then hit Egypt if I can. And by hitting Egypt is CBD start to go around Middle East and to become regulated. And that's always the gateway for cannabis. It starts with CBD and it goes on with different products. And from there, I would love to be able to start something over there, at least to reconnect our roots again and re-educate the people and take what's been taken from us by the French and the British occupation.
Yeah,
it definitely has mangled our culture, and when it left, it didn't take the garbage with them. They just left it there, and we kept living with that and believing that this is what life is about. And guess what? It's basically a war against on drugs, and it never succeeded. It never will, and all the prohibition has led people to consume toxic products that are called hash, which are not hash.
Yeah.
So I would love to change that. I believe we are entitled for that, because we've been around for more than 7,000 years, and that's what we've been doing for thousands of years to get some measly occupation to change the history. It's not really where it's at. And the way things are opening up and progressing, yeah, we are the most deserved to be blessed again with the plant, with the proper knowledge. Because if you think big pharmas are taking enough lives here, you definitely do not see the other pictures all over Middle East. And the reason why people are hitting drugs, it's because all these pharmaceuticals, you get prescribed something, you don't get it again, and you chase the high for whatever reason. So yeah, that would be one wish I have. That's all.
Have you worked with much CBD varietals, Chevy, as far as extraction?
Very, very rare. I would love to work with hemp and CBD. I'm definitely interested in the resin composition. It could be the missing link to many creations that I have right now. The only way I've worked with it was in flour, very rare in hash, and flour rosin of things that I've produced, and they've been mainly for infusions, if I'm making topicals, or whenever I used to get those anxiety attacks from smoking BHOs, whether it's being good or bad, just the high potency was never a vibe. And yeah, CBD joint was always a great fix, because again, I have tried everything in between from cannabis to whatever, and pharmaceuticals been a constant thought. I get anxiety, I can take this pill to make anxiety go away, but actually I could just do that CBD part and see how it works, and it worked greatly with no adverse effects, with nothing. I could take it the same way people take their puffer before washing. I smoke a CBD joint. and I can hit whatever BHO or you name it in high potency and high heat, and I should be somewhat okay compared to just taking a big hit.
Hey Chevy, so I know that you're mostly or strictly pretty much solventless
Yeah,
across the board. Do you have any experience with CBD isolate? Have you added any CBD isolate
of course, of
into the
course.
mix? Yeah, so
Yes,
how has
yes,
that
yes,
worked out?
yes. I believe so. On a titanium nail, definitely was the first use of CBD concentrate, CBD isolate, in some dispensaries in downtown. It was a known brand. I forgot what it is, but they had it in half grams, and that has been my go-to because that was more common than having a CBD flower. And the CBD flower that I have used, and it's been definitely up my alley, were the Charlotte's Web. That was a savior strain for me when it comes into all unpleasant feelings. So yeah, I've had the isolate. I can compare it closely to the flower. I've been using it just to dampen down the bad feelings that I get if I smoke high temperature, high concentrate product. But I can't really say which is better. But it works on that certain thing I need it to work for, isolate or
Have
flower.
have you ever put it in any of the hash wraps and smoked
I
it?
have had it in spliffs with tobacco, and it had worked amazing. Definitely not the way I would advise anyone to smoke it, but everyone is entitled to their own use and what they use, as long as they know it's bad. It's all about education and awareness, instead of just trying to shit on people or trying to make them feel bad about their choices. Education is always good because if you get some sense and your genes are meant to be on this earth for the longest time, you would know what is what and why things are happening and how you could fix it if you needed to. So, yeah, everyone could do whatever they want, but it's good to know what is right and what's wrong. But yeah, CBD. I would love to get a chance to work with more CBD flower, and I believe it's gonna add great additions to the work.
Okay. I have another question.
Yes.
You've had the privilege of working with identical cultivars grown in salts and organics. And I
Correct.
would love for you to give the viewers a detailed breakdown of the observations you made personally.
Okay. So a non-scientific observation, comparing it again to food. The salt-based was a fluffier resin, far more waxy, and the yields were significantly lower than LSOs and things that um, are fed ferments, compost tea, and all these crazy brews that people are doing nowadays. Pineapple Reserve is killing it right now in that style, and you definitely get one of the nicest resins Canada wide. And yeah, that was reflected upon his LSO style. So, what is the observation compared to food? I would like to compare it to a thick skinned orange for salts. It's extra waxy. The resin weight is not as much as it is from LSO. There's always exceptions to every rule, and that could be cultivar related. It could be the feed program and the flushing. The possibilities can be endless, but if I can agree on something, the salts have had less melty, more waxy resin as opposed to LSO. And I want to assume that has something to do with the nutrients delivery because you have all these living beings taking care of all these complex compounds and breaking it down to simple uh, molecules where the plant can absorb it to its full potential instead of just same concept as humans. When you have some vitamin deficiency, iron or whatever, they prescribe you those pills or give you injections, and then they test your blood and it shows it's active. Not active, it shows in your bloodstream, but is it actually getting absorbed? Definitely not the case. We were not designed to consume concentrated or just indirect.
Vitamins are the biggest scam in the world. Preach, brother.
So same thing goes for the plant. When you give it directly what it needs, I doubt it's going on to its full potential. It's growing, it's thriving, it's putting out fire, but it's like 8 out of 10. A 10 out of 10 would be something that you get from nature. It goes for the plant, it goes for us too. Like you have a vitamin D deficiency, you're definitely not consuming enough raw animal organs. Organs are a disgusting thought for some people, but if the animal is raised properly or it's a wild animal, like for example, liver is disgusting when you cook it. It has that strong mineral flavor, but if you had tried it raw, that flavor is pretty faint to non-existent, and it's enough to cure whatever deficiencies you got. Because
Very interesting. In the days of Liver King, everybody's watching Liver King these days.
and I definitely do not support the guy, and I'm not talking about liver because of him. I would like to clear that, because he juices, he uses supplements, and he is promoting an unnatural lifestyle. Eat raw. Like, look at Japan. Look at even parts of the Middle East. We have raw meat dishes. You have the Russian dish where they have this ground meat, an egg yolk, and then tiny, tiny bits of plants, vegetables. Very tiny, just enough to taste that you can put it on your stuff. And we have been growing to consume raw our whole life. Same thing goes for the plant, the soil. Nature has survived and been thriving for all this long without human interference. So for us to assume that we have the means, we might get it at some point, but there's always going to be a missing link where it's showing deficiencies on humans or plants. But the more you try to find ways to replicate nature and not on the same sequence, something ends up getting messed up in the process.
Yeah, no, that's I agree, man. I think that's and I agree with what you said about Liver King. That guy's definitely juicing. There's no way that you're looking like that. You're walking around looking like that. I think that's ridiculous. But
naturally, as a human being, you should not be able to go that low of a fat from a bodybuilder experience. And secondly, to maintain that physique, your body is going to get into a catabolic phase if you stay on that for long, because we need fat for sustenance if you happen to be starving, or just for the normal organ functions in your body. Those low fat percentages will affect your heart, will affect your lungs, will affect everything else that is working.
Brain. They affect your brain. Your brain only uses fat.
Your brain is 60% cholesterol. For people that are cholesterol is bad, you don't eat this, eat more plant. Guess what? All the cholesterol people are talking about is, number one, cooked. When cholesterol get exposed to heat at some point, it turns toxic. Same case with anything. The chemical composition that happened through cooking is definitely why most people are sick, especially that nice black crust, brown crust on a steak, that carcinogenic layer.
I was gonna say that's cancer.
Yeah. It's just not meant like that. And even if you're gonna scorch your stuff like that, at least don't overcook the meat. Make sure it's still red on the inside. It's okay for the meat to bleed, unless people are eating it in a restaurant and it's a carpaccio or poke or whatever style sashimi. Then we're okay, we're eating it. But then when we talk about it, it's like, ew, disgusting. Why would you eat that raw? Well, guess what? It's the same thing. It's just not on a fancy plate, surrounded with tons of plants and oils and aromatics.
Yeah, 100%.
It's just still the same thing. So same goes for plant. And I wonder if that on a BHO level, what are the chemical changes that happen to the cannabinoids compounds and the terpenes, and then the way they're consumed at what temperature? Because if that's the case, through the changes that happen to our food through cooking, the same probably happen probably during purging or during dabbing. Because
not only that, use of CRC, like
yes,
as someone who like I actively do this for my day job,
yeah.
I can like, yeah, like what are we doing with these powders? Like, we're not. So like I got into it with, I have like I think he's a PhD chemist or a master's chemist that I sit beside,
Mhm.
and I was running this with him today.
Yeah.
And I don't think we isomerize cannabinoids
Mhm.
based on the powders and the pH and the way that we're recovering solvent.
Mhm.
I don't think we're hitting a point where we're isomerizing any different cannabinoids at all, especially due to the testing that we have. But terpenes is something completely different. I think we potentially could be isomerizing, and more than likely isomerizing terpenes. I don't have much data.
Can you explain
for
isomerizing
that.
briefly, what it means?
So just like that a molecule actually is positioned changes. So we're creating like stereoisomers of terpenes.
It's right and left.
Right and left. Like, but I mean, there's
If your
some that
hands are
have
the
more.
same,
Yeah.
your hands are the same, but you have a right and a left, and they're like distinctly different, even though they're the same.
Got it. Okay.
So that changes the flavor depending on its position. Right. So like, and I only have this really through my own bioassay. Is like, I know how a flavor should taste, and then I know how it kind of cures out.
Yeah.
Versus I taste another flavor that I've used this powder or that powder on over time.
Yeah.
And then, or I've procured this material from a friend, and I know that it's supposed to taste this way, and then over time it changes to have like a more medicine-y, different flavor, right, than it did originally.
Yeah.
Or it just comes out that way to begin with. So it's just weird, especially like the way that it influences oxidization, and then the way that it just kind of is consumed in a more fresh state as well, versus its kind of unadulterated state.
Definitely a useful insight that I could look up into and learn more. I definitely would be interested in learning about solvent base just to understand the chemical changes that happen to the end product.
Yeah,
at least to help
it anytime.
Yeah, because no information is bad information. There's a spot for everything. It's just the right time or the right placement for it. So I believe there's enough to learn from solvent to enhance or avoid the same things that happen with solvent into solventless. So all knowledge is always appreciated.
Absolutely.
Chevy,
Before we turn into our last few questions, I know that there's one last thing I want to bring up. And the question is, are you interhational?
It's right here. That's for everyone.
Just so everybody knows, they are two different entities. They are two different humans.
But I'm glad that people are feeling that, because this is where I would like to associate my team or colleagues that we resonate at an intellectual and a motive level for the cannabis industry, where people are just assuming we're the same people, which is great. That's what I would like for things to happen in the future, where a person is known by a product rather than a brand or a name.
Yeah. And
that's where I would envision my hash making would reach a level where you see the product and you tell, oh, it's made by this person. Because every person has a style and an influence that are distinctive if you regularly consume their work or exposed to it.
There's proof. You don't have to see them in a room.
Yeah, exactly.
And for those of you that don't know, reach out. Interhational is a really, really nice guy.
Yeah. All the great merch that Jemison and I have is all there, and even more. We never have a limit on a stock. The way we have organized the website, he has organized his website was, we don't have a physical stock. It's all virtual, and that way people can have as much as they want. Eliminate waste. I mean, the only thing you have a problem with would be that transportation, just because it's an unnecessary emission, but I believe we would figure out better alternatives in the future, or some progression will happen to our transportation. Because it's already happening with all these, with the vegan wave, where you have all these unnatural, we have these fruits that grows in certain areas that doesn't grow in that land, and it's just flooded with it, and it's just doesn't make sense that much of transportation, and monocropping is not where it's at. It's a holistic vision. Food to
Absolutely.
clothing to cannabis, they're all linked as much as you want to look at it.
I love that. I think that's so cool. So, I mean, we were lucky enough to have Kind Selections on another one of our episodes, and he mentioned that he's soon looking to make the transition into the legal landscape. Is that something that is on the horizon for you yourself?
Run me through it. What does that mean?
Are you um, with all the attention that you're getting from the hash wraps and the creations and the impact you're having in the Canadian space? Have you been approached by legal Canadian cannabis entities to bring this brand into market? And is that something that you're currently considering?
Oh, definitely. I have few offers lined, but things have never reached a conclusion yet, because in the middle of negotiations, I'm trying to protect my SOPs and IPs as much as possible, and also, whoever is taking me on their team or want the work to be reflected on the recreational market, they also want some sort of assurance on how it's that going to work. But yeah, some things are in the work. Nothing is definite yet. I'm making hash every day as much as I can, and I'm enjoying that. And if the time comes to be included on an LP level, I will join in if both parties are happy, me and them.
Beautiful. That makes a lot of sense. And don't rush into anything. And beware of anyone telling you to stop talking to anybody, because you should
Yeah,
talk to everybody.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's one of the things I learned. Again, I came here at a young
Well,
age.
he's Egyptian. He's not Russian.
Good point. I'll make sure to memorize that. Yeah, but there's just a lot of greed, and I definitely have a bitter taste in my mouth for people that trying to put control, because
Absolutely.
I, not me directly, but my people, our ancestors, has been oppressed enough and taken a big part of our founding culture. A great founding stone for that was cannabis, and just growing in general. Um, and yeah, it just doesn't sit well with me where someone would be able to tell you that, yeah, we're trying to get some things to work for you. Don't rush in and go talk to someone else. Actually, the one of the people that I might have a potential work with on an LP level said the opposite of everything as those people that I met at the beginning, and this is where I know things are on the right track.
That's
Just
good.
gotta be, gotta read between the thin lines so everyone's rights are reserved.
Perfect.
Definitely
Chevy,
protect yourself though. Being on the inside, like protect yourself, bro, for sure. You do good work, and definitely, like, I think you got a good head on your shoulders, but definitely protect you.
Definitely my the way I feel on the inside is never altered by my surroundings, which I found crushing in Canada for new immigrants, or people that are relatively new to the country, or just don't have a strong foundation being raised. A lot of people get lost to the depression, drug use, and all these things. I've witnessed it myself, and I just think, yeah, it's a tough land, but also it's a land of opportunities, and it's tough in terms of your mental health. People are easily affected by um, um, daily daily interactions, which is counter interactive. Um, yeah, it's somewhat different. Yeah, somewhat different around here. It's not affecting me at all. I mean, I never left the country since I came in here. I've just been enjoying the ride. It's every day is a new adventure. There's as much as good people as much as bad people. Just channel all that energy into something, and I found my calling in hash. The reason I'm sticking to hash with everything because I've worked under people, and I did not like that in terms of like common jobs. Because I've been involved in the food industry for the longest time back home, and I try to do it here. I built my way up from a prep cook to a sous chef, just from a culinary background without the education part. And yeah, when it comes into real talk, when you're running their operation and they don't want to pay you as good, is where I felt undermined. So I decided to skip that. Went through construction. It was good money, but it was physically taxing. And yeah, you get people always shitting on your work at some point. Things are not done the certain ways they want it, or it's not even your fault, it's your teammate fault, and everyone don't get paid or get paid adequately because of these mistakes. So yeah, I decided to gamble and say, I'm gonna reconnect with my roots. I got my freedom here, and I got a good base of knowledge and understanding and the palate. So it's just gonna be like another kitchen job. Yeah, I'm gonna thrive, or I will go back home, and I'm still here.
Chevy, last question, man. What advice do you have for young guys and or any person in the Canadian space that's a hash maker that's trying to learn the trade and come up? What would be your gold nugget that you'd want to pass on to them?
Definitely do not go with mainstream ideologies in terms of trying to educate yourself, because when you start to trying to anchor onto more of an advanced level, or just the snob mentality of certain things need to be done that way, or it's not good, it's bad quality. Definitely do not listen to anything until you go through it yourself. Everyone's personal experience is different than others, and it doesn't matter if you have been forever smoking or you just started yesterday. Educating yourself. So yeah, it starts with education, connect with old roots, and try everything for yourself before you knock it, because it seems to be a trend where people are same thing as memes. People treat things as jokes, or everything can be a joke if you want, but you are um, taking any chance that you have into learning new stuff because it's built upon other people's bias. So go with your own. At the end of the day, no one knows everything. There's people that have more experience than others, but no one knows and no one got the full truth. You might got the truth, but yeah, we're all humans. Don't listen to anyone, listen to yourself, and yeah, go with your own version.
Hey, you're muted. And then I just wanted to ask real quick too. Early on in the conversation, you were mentioning something about hash consumption and it not being best dabbed, I think.
Can you remind me a bit more?
Oh man, I wish I could rewind the conversation. I just in my head, I thought you were alluding to like some new device or some way of
Mm-hmm.
preparing or consuming hash that
Mm-hmm.
we're not really like thinking of in the forefront of my head. Maybe I'm just wishful
So
thinking,
I was
dabbed
talking
out.
about possibly about the consumption of more hash and less rosin. Number one,
Okay.
abundance, and number two, hash high is always superior to any other high. And if people argue that, it's heavily driven by bias and people with headies, and the, they just look at things lowly because of the biased information they grew up to learn. um, but overall, smoke more hash. Rosin is a luxury. Squish it when you want, because it's very nice like that. You get it at a fresh press, you let it cure, you let it cure for even more, and you're tasting it at every stage. And from there, you have the high that everyone should be getting. You can guarantee your lungs are going to be safer when you're smoking hash because you dab it over 600 Celsius. I mean Celsius, Fahrenheit. Yeah. Yeah, I have a tough time in Canada. You guys are not using the metric system. It's making everything tough.
Oh, well, Chevy, thank you so much for your time, man. We'd love to have you back on.
Pleasure to be on. Looks like
Yeah,
it's
it's been great having you, man. Thanks
close
for the
to 3
convo.
hours, but we'll come back for more.
We'll come back for more.
Yeah, very much appreciated.
Yeah, feel free to hit me up on the page for anything. I mean, not the details of the tech, but I'm more than happy to guide people the same way I was guided. Not just because I want to protect everything, but know that part of getting half of the truth or half of the information is where you bring new aspects or you find your skill right there. So I had to go through that, and I would love for others to go through the same thing. Feel challenged and come up with your own version.
Awesome.
I love that. That's the Frenchie vibe, man. If you don't share it, you lose it.
Yeah.
And big love to you, sir. Thank you
Likewise.
very much for your time
Appreciate
tonight.
your time. I'm looking forward to chatting and meeting with all of you at some point.
Absolutely.
One day in person, absolutely.
Talk
Almost
soon.
done.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Like button.